This problem is from Giesecke Technical Drafting, Chapter 6, the 15th edition, and it's exercise 6.5-4. Now I left out one hole in the part for you to see if you can figure out how to generate that hole on your own. So I've started a new metric part file, and I'm going to expand the origin. I'll turn on the visibility of the origin center point. So I right click, turn on the visibility of the origin center point. And in this problem, I'm on the view cube. I'm going to go around to the right side of the view cube. So the front, right, top side, I'm going to go around to the right side. It's right reading. I'm going to then come over and find that right side plane, the YZ plane. I'll right click and tell it to start a new sketch. I'm then going to draw a rectangle, and I'll draw that, and I always anchor my geometry to the origin in some way or another. So I'm going to click on the origin first, and then I'm going to come down to the lower right. And what I recommend is always create one circle or one line or one rectangle, and then dimension it immediately for a sense of scale for the rest of the sketch. Notice that Inventor automatically puts some parallel constraints on here, a perpendicular between here and here, parallel, and in 3D now, you know, horizontal and vertical can be confusing when working in a 3D model, but z-axis is vertical, and if it's zy, z-axis is vertical and y is horizontal. If it was xy, x is horizontal and y is vertical. So I'm going to go ahead and dimension this distance, and I'll dimension that as 35, and then I'm going to dimension this distance as 30. So looking at the view cube, so this distance 35, that's from the bottom to the top of the reference to the view cube, and then from the front to the back a distance of 30. And I'm going to draw another rectangle, and I'm going to draw that rectangle about like that. And I could have drawn that as 3 lines rather than as the rectangle, but the rectangle is only 2 clicks. 1 click, second click, done. So it's fewer clicks to do it as a rectangle. And then I'm going to dimension this distance from here to here as 10. I'm going to dimension this distance as 10. And notice then as I put these dimensions in that the geometry changes color. So when I put in this final dimension, it will all turn black. The sketch is fully constrained. Okay. So and then I'm going to go around on my view cube so I can see this in my isometric view, and I will finish this sketch and save it. Every time I do something right, save the file, and I'll do extrude, and I'm going to select this profile, the C shape in here, so I don't have to trim out this geometry. I can just leave it the way it is in my sketch, and then I'm going to come out with this geometry a distance of 70. I'll say OK to that and save it. So I have the solid geometry started, and then I need to cut away some excess on this geometry. So I'm going to go around to the front view, and actually let's go back to the isometric here for a minute. So this XY plane here I have on the front of the part. I could do my sketch either on this face or this face, the front of the part, or I could do it on the XY plane. It's always advisable, if you can, to do your sketches on the origin planes rather than on the part face. Later on, when we do more complex parts, when we go to edit those parts, we'll find that it's more robust if we do our sketches, less likely to fail if we use the origin planes to do our sketches. So I'm going to do a new sketch on the XY plane, And let's rotate around and look at that from the front view. And I'm going to draw a line. Now, depending how you have Inventor set up, it may snap to this line right here, but I'm going to click right here. I'm going to come over. Notice it puts that vertical constraint on here. I'll come over. It'll put either a horizontal or perpendicular constraint. And I want to come down to this line, and I want it actually on that line. Depending on how you have Inventor set up, it may or may not snap there. I want here, and I want on this corner, and I'm going to come back to that corner. Now, if I try dragging this line, I see that that point didn't snap to that line. Now, I can try to add a coincident between here and here, and so if I select coincident, select that point, I click on this line, it moves it down to that location. And again, so if I drag a corner, we see that this corner isn't connected to that line. This isn't connected to that line. And so one of the actually two important tips now that we've covered, two critical tips. Tip number one was draw one rectangle or one circle or one line and dimension it immediately for a sense of scale for the rest of the sketch. The second tip is when things don't connect together like you would expect they should, drag points around and see where it look at the behavior. Do the lines stay horizontal? Do they stay vertical? I see that I want a coincident between this point, and that turns black. And so then I'll put some dimensions in here, and so I'm going to dimension this distance as 40, and I will dimension this distance as 15, and I will dimension from the origin over to this line a distance of 20. The geometry all turns black. My sketch is all fully defined, and down here in the right corner it tells me that it's fully defined. I'm going to finish sketch, and I'll go around to an isometric view so I can see this, what's happening. So I'll do extrude. I want to extrude that area, but I want to go back through the part, and I want it to cut through the part. And rather than give it a distance, I'm going to tell it to go through all. And that way, if I change any of the first portion of the geometry, no matter how I make a change, this will always go all the way through the part. And so we'll look at that from this side. And so there we have the extrusion cut through the part. I'll then I'm going to do a sketch on the top view, and again, I could do it on this plane, I could do it on this plane, but I prefer to rather than select the face of the part, select one of the origin planes. So I'm going to right click on the origin plane, I'll tell it new sketch, and let's go around now to the top view, and I'm going to draw a circle about right here. And I want a circle, I want it straight over from this. If I track over from there, I may get a tracking line. And really to make sure that those stay lined up, I'm going to put a construction line between those two circles. And if I click on that line, I see that there's a horizontal constraint on it, and I may want to change that to a construction line. I don't have to, but I'm going to right click and change that to a construction line type. I'm then going to dimension the distance between those two circles, a distance of 20. I'll dimension the diameter of one of these circles as 10, and then I'm going to dimension the distance from this circle over to this edge. I'm going to dimension that a distance of 10. I want the distance from this line to this front edge, I want that to be 15. Now notice this circle has turned black. If I this one hasn't. If I drag it, I see that the size of it isn't defined, and so I'll do equal. I want this circle to be equal to that circle in size. So now everything is fully constrained. Let's go around to an isometric view so we can see what's happening. I'll finish this sketch, and I'll do extrude. I will select these two circles, and I want to go the other direction, and I want to cut, and I'll tell it to go through all. So no matter how I change this, those two holes will always go all the way through the part. So there we've completed our part, the 3D model. Now we're ready to do a drawing. So I will go to place the drawing, and I'm going to tell it to place a base view. And so here is my base view. I'll go ahead and say OK to that. And then there's a boundary around that view. If I grab hold of that boundary, I can drag this view down here, and then I'm going to do projected view. I'm going to project this view up to here, over to the right side, and I'll put an isometric view up here. Once I've said where to create those three views, I'll right click and tell Inventor to create those, generate those three views. I need to put some center marks in these holes, so I'll go to the annotation tab, and I will select center marks. I'll select this circle, and I'll select this circle, and then I need to do center lines for where those holes appear in the side view. And so I'm going to select this line and this line. Let me select the right tool here. Select this line and select this line. Put the center line halfway in between those, and this one and this one. And then I also need to do that over here. Okay, so I have those center lines. I'll go through and put some dimensions on here. So I'll do dimension, and so the overall width of this part is 70. This distance is 20. The distance from here over to here was 40. I think I'll do the distance from here to here as 10. The distance from here to here as 10. The overall height was 35. And so we don't really need to dimension from here to here, because when we divide, or when we subtract the 20 from the 35, we have that that leftover dimension. But I do need this dimension from here, and I'm going to dimension that to here. I'm going to dimension the distance between centers of these holes, and so that was 20, and I'll dimension it from here to here, and I'm going to move that dimension over. We'll move dimensions around later. I'll dimension one of these circles, and I need to dimension from this circle to this line. That distance is 15, and the distance from front to back, which I could put up here or I could put over here, from front to back, from here to here, and that distance of 30. I might move some of these dimensions around, make it look aesthetically pleasing, and so you know, I've got those two looking nice, and the 10, that looks good. 15, 30. I have these two dimensions. I'm missing one dimension here, so I need to know the distance from here to here, or from here to here. So I'm going to dimension that dimension over here in this view, and so I have that distance, and I think I have all of the dimensions. Let me know if you find any missing dimensions in my drawing.